Okay, so now that we have finished working on our files, I'm going to show you how to set up a GitHub repo where we will store this work. GitHub.com is a website where people store packages of code that they've written. They use it for what's called version control, which is keeping track of changes as things go through. So if you make a mistake, you can always roll back. There's also a way that people collaborate, multiple developers and data analysts collaborate on projects and work together. And the Git process has a really nice method for allowing people to work together and not get everything all confused. So when you sign up for the class, you should have signed up for a GitHub account. Just a reminder, if you Google GitHub students, they have this really great GitHub student developer pack, which is free and comes with all kinds of great stuff, including the ability to have private repos. But then there's also like, unlimited free public and private repositories. And so what that means is like a package of code that only you can see, or only you and the people you choose to let see it can see it, or public. It also comes with like all this other free kind of stuff, lots of access to courses, and definitely worth checking out. Anyway, so let's go ahead and sign in to your GitHub account. If you haven't signed, you can sign up there. Just gonna sign in real quick. Okay, I already have a lot of repositories. Yours is probably not going to look like this. It will probably look kind of blank. But the first thing we're going to do, and here you can see these are all of the different repositories I've created. So our class is up on is a separate GitHub repository or package of code. Our syllabus is a README file in that package. Here's just a bunch of other like things I've worked on. Anytime we do new journalism projects, we create things. So lots of repos, including some like other people have written. So yeah. All right, so to create a new repository, you can a bunch of ways to do it. You can click this big green button that says new, or come up here to the plus button and say new repository. So new repo. There are ways to create repos without being on the website. This is the process that I find easiest for students. So I'm going to create a new repository. I'm the owner. I also belong to a bunch of other organizations, Capital News Service, Howard Center Investigations. This is a private one. So just, you can call it whatever you like, it doesn't matter. But for this sample one, I'm just going to call this Data Journalism Fall 19. Actually, I'll call it Coursework Data Journalism Fall 19. You can put whatever you want. Data journalism, doesn't matter. Just a brief description. So this is a repo with coursework for fall 2019 data journalism at the University of Maryland J School. I'm going to go ahead and set this to public so anybody can look at it. You can also make it private. I would prefer that you make your repo public for the purpose of this. If you don't want other people to look at it right now, that's totally fine. There's no requirement for the class that it be public. It just means there's going to be an extra step where you're going to need to give me access to it so I can look at it, because we're going to turn in all of our files this way going forward. All right, so go ahead and set it public. If not, you can set it private. Okay, so a couple different little options here. So the first is to initialize this repository with a README file. This is a good idea. This is essentially a text file in the markdown format that we've talked about, where you'll explain the purpose of the repo. By default, GitHub will put the title of the repo you're creating and the description there, but you can add more stuff. Just as a way of understanding, in our class GitHub repo, the syllabus is the README file. So you've seen one of these before. A couple other things we're going to do. So we have the option to add what's called a .gitignore file. I'll explain what this is, but basically this is the place where you would say to GitHub, I'm going to put a bunch of files in this repository that I'm making, but maybe there are certain things that I don't want to store online where anybody can see. So a good example of this would be like, sometimes we have like access codes for data points that we're trying to access online, like through things called an application program interface, keys. We would leave those out of here. There's also like, GitHub has a hard time with very, very big files, so you might create a folder where you're storing very large data sets and you wouldn't upload that. So we're going to add a gitignore. There's a bunch of like flavors of gitignore depending on what language you're writing. There's actually one specifically for R, and so I'd recommend adding that. Add a license. You can put none. These are a bunch of like open source licenses where other people can use your code. I usually pick the MIT license. I don't put a lot of thought into it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and create it. And you'll notice a couple things here, right? So here's this gitignore file. I can click on it and see. I'll explain what this is doing later on. Here's the license file, which this might be the first time in my life I've ever actually looked at it. And then the README, this is the README here, and just some very basic name of the repo and a description. This is Markdown, remember? So the reason that this giant thing is bold, I'm looking at the raw, it's got one £. It's a one heading. So yeah. Okay, so now we're going to take this repo that we created and we are going to pull it down to our desktop, or a process called cloning. So I'm going to open GitHub Desktop, and my video screen is not actually big enough to show you my like taskbar, but this is what the icon looks like on the taskbar. It's a little cat. It's actually an octocat. That's their logo. It's like a combination of an octopus and a cat. It's awesome, but I have no idea why. So I'm going to go ahead and open that. And yours will probably be blank, but mine has existing repos that I've cloned. So GitHub Desktop is a software tool that sits on our local machine and allows us to both pull down repositories from GitHub, make changes to those repositories, and then push them back up to github.com. So the first thing we're going to do is go to File, Clone Repository. You can also click on the drop-down menu here and click the Add button and clone a repository. So this is an existing one we've created, and it's going to ask you to sign in to your github.com account. So just go ahead and do that real quick. gmail.com and grab my password and sign in. Okay, and we're going to clone a repository again. All right, so it should pull up a list of all of your repositories from GitHub. You can see I've got a ton, including I'm like working on with some other people. If it doesn't show up, you might hit the refresh button. Sometimes you may have to sign out and sign back in again if you've been signed in and created a new repo. Just a couple little things. I'm just going to type data journalism. So here's the repo we created. Coursework, data journalism, fall 19. And I'm going to select that one and I'm going to hit clone. For some reason, if it didn't show up, you can also use this URL tab to do it. So I can come over to URL and I can just type my name. So smussenden / coursework, what was it? Coursework, data-journalism fall 19. So data-journalism fall 19. And go ahead and hit clone there. And it pulls it down. Okay, so right now, it put it on my desktop. Just one thing to note, I'm actually going to remove this and walk you through that process one more time, just to because the location of the folder path is important. So I'm just going to remove that, move the repository to the trash, and I'm going to add again. And okay, so coursework, data journalism, fall 19. One more time. Okay. All right. So there it is right there, right? Here's the local path where it's going to put it. So you can select this. I usually put them on my desktop, but you're all welcome to put wherever. But if you want to put it in your documents folder, this is where you would change that. Okay. So there's the folder on my desktop. And notice in it is nothing but this license and the README file. Remember we created a gitignore file too. The gitignore file is actually hidden, and we can look at that, at the whole thing inside of a text editor like Atom, which you've also downloaded. So this is what the symbol for Atom looks like in your in your dock if you've installed it. I'm just going to go ahead and open it up. And here's Atom, and I can go ahead and go to File and click Add Project Folder, and the project folder I'm going to add is our GitHub repo. And you'll notice there's two things that didn't appear when we just opened it in the browser. The first is license and README are there, but .gitignore and .git, because they start with dot on the Mac system, they're hidden. But you can see them here, and we can edit them here. Just a note about a lot of the things like by default that the default GitHub gitignore file for R will do. It'll hide a lot of your like R project type files and other things. So things that like aren't particularly useful for somebody else. Okay, so let's walk through the process of adding our first, bit of code to this. So I want you to create 3 folders inside of here. So the first is class assignments. Those are for in-class assignments. Labs. That's for the weekly labs. And then just thinking ahead, this will be for the data analysis project. You're going to find things easier anytime you're doing any kind of technical work. Just don't put spaces in the names of files or folders. I'm using underscores to separate them. Okay, and then you should have the lab we created folder on your desktop, and that's got your R project folder. It's got your HTML folder that you knitted, your R project, R markdown, and the data folder with the data. So I'm just going to take this folder and I'm going to drag it into labs. And as you do that, I want you to pay attention to what happens over here. So I'm going to drag this into labs and drop it. And now it's pasted, and I click back over into GitHub Desktop. And we have now a bunch of different things that have been added in this list, 7 changed files. So it's added 3 DS store files, which are super annoying and not of particular use, and will cause you a lot of problems. So I'm going to show you later how to basically tell the computer to never pay attention to those things. They're created as like little system files as you're working on Macs. It's added the more useful stuff too, right? So the data, the TSV, the lab04.html, lab04.r markdown, and lab04.r project. Okay, so we've added it into the folder, but there's a couple step process between here and actually getting it up onto github.com. So the first thing is we are going to commit, C-O-M-M-I-T. I think that's how you spell it. I really should look that up probably. We're going to commit the change to our Git package, to our repo. So I'm just going to say adding lab4 files. It's a good idea to write yourself good commit messages, because if you're trying to roll back in time and maybe go see where you made a change, especially if something breaks when you're working on larger projects, it's helpful to know where to look. Real talk, my commit messages are usually like one more change, update. They're not particularly useful. So don't be like me, do yourself a favor. But okay, so we wrote a message. You can write a description with more details, but I typically don't do this. And then we're going to do what's called committing to master. And later in the semester, when we may work together on some projects, we may get into different kind of branches, master or sub branches and things. But for right now, master is sort of the main file, and that's really mostly what we're going to be working with as you're working on your own project. So I'm going to commit to master. And you'll notice right here now, right? Committing just now, adding lab4 files. There's my commit message. Okay, so first, we made some changes to this package by dropping things in. Then we wrote a commit message and committed them. And now we need to get them actually up to GitHub as part of our remote server. So I'm going to do what's called push origin here. And it takes a few seconds. So a bunch of technical stuff about what it's doing. Now there's no additional changes. So if I go to github.com and just go back to the main repo page, now you will notice that there's this folder called labs, and it was updated 44 seconds ago. There's also this really annoying file .dsstore, which I'll walk you through how we'll delete in a minute. When I click into labs, there's lab04. And here's all my files, right? Here's my R Markdown file. This is the thing you'll turn in for homework. So ultimately what you're going to turn in is this link right here, this link up here. There's a link to the HTML file. It's not going to look like the HTML, but HTML like the web version. This actually has the HTML code that is produced by the knitting process, which is insane. Just look at all this stuff. It actually ends up being just a whole lot of excellent styling. Okay. So yeah, so I want to show you the process for how you might also change files on the GitHub website. This isn't something you're going to do a lot, but what I'm hoping you'll take out of this is with GitHub, what this allows you to do is actually work on the same project on multiple computers. So you can like clone the repository on one computer, make some changes, push it up to GitHub, and then have it cloned to another computer, pull that down, make some changes, push it back up. What I want to do is make some changes just on the website. Again, you're probably not actually going to do this a lot, but it's designed to replicate the feeling of working on a different computer. So if you're working on it in a computer in a lab and you want to get on your local laptop, this can be helpful. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to this main README file here, and you see this little pencil. We're going to edit. I'm just going to add really not much. I'm just going to add one line here. So I put my classwork and homework here. I don't know, make it sound more intelligent. Okay, and then because everything on GitHub works through the commit process, we're going to say updating the README file. Notice this looks very similar to what we see on GitHub Desktop. Most of the time, again, you're going to be working through this. We're going to commit it directly to the master branch. There's this other option here, create a new branch for this commit and start a pull request. Don't worry about what those things mean. We're just working always on the master. Okay, so I'm going to commit the change. And now I've added one line to it. Okay, so let's imagine that you had been working on your lab computer and you'd pushed all of your recent lab assignments up. And then the process I just did here was like on your local laptop, you went in at home and made one quick change to the README file and committed the change and then pushed it back up to the server. So what I want to show you now is when you are working, when you make changes on another computer like that, or in the future if you're working with somebody and your partner makes a change, I want to show you the process to make sure that when you are back on your other computer, you're getting the most latest versions of the files. Okay, so I'm going to do here what's called fetch origin, right? So we last fetched 4 minutes ago. In that time period, I've made a change to the file. So I'm going to fetch. Okay, so now it says pull origin, and you see this one thing here. It means there's one change up on the master that isn't yet in sync with this version that I have on my desktop, right? The README file that I have on my desktop version, which I can pull up Atom so you can look at. Okay, the README file we have in the local version, note that it doesn't have this last sentence I wrote, right? Up here, I put my classwork and homework here. So that change is present on the version that's up on github.com, but it's not yet here in this version. Okay, so I can get it by after fetching, pulling. Okay, and now if I go into the README file, now that sentence is there, right? So that changed when I pulled. So anytime you sit down on your local machine, that's a process you always want to do. Pull, fetch, and then pull to make sure you have the latest version. Okay, so just want to help you solve a couple little thorny problems that are really annoying. So we have all these DS store files, which, I mean, it'd be fine to leave them up there, but what I often find is that they create these conflicts where they prevent you from merging. So I am going to, first I'm going to delete them. And, oh man, they're everywhere, like bed bugs. Okay. And then in my git ignore file, I'm going to add a new line at the bottom here that just says ignore.ds_store files. That's a comment, right? And then I'm just going to put .ds_store. And what that says is anytime you find a DS store file in anywhere in the repo, in any folder, then don't include it. Okay. Sometimes you'll see things like rsconnect/. That means that any files that are inside of a folder called rsconnect, ignore those. All right, so I'm going to save that. Then I'm going to come back over here, and you'll notice that we have some changes, right? So the dsstore file, that minus sign means it was removed. This is what's called a diff viewer. So we can see that to this gitignore file, I added a line about .dsstore. So I can go ahead and commit those changes. So fixing dsstore problem plus updating gitignore. These are the most verbose Git messages I've written in a long time. Commit to master, push origin. Okay. Now we can go back to github.com and see that all the dsstore files are gone and that our updated dsstore file line is there. And you can see the last time you submitted it. Okay, so for homework, the things you're going to be submitting for the labs are your R Markdown file. So I'm just clicking this link here, and I'm copying and pasting this link, right? And I'm posting it on Elms. And I'm also doing the same with the HTML file that I created. Okay, I hope that was helpful. Don't worry if you aren't totally getting this process. We'll go over it next week. Thanks.